So let's have an honest talk about what leadership looks like. For too many people, you hear the word leader and you immediately think of somebody at the top of a food chain, somebody that's in charge of everything, the boss, the man, as high as the President of the United States. Instead of thinking about the fact that an effective leader is so much more than the boss. So when we think about what leadership should look like, it's kind of fun to look back at one of the best comedy sketches of all time, which is, of course, the infamous Abbott and Costello act, Who's on First? And when you hear this routine, especially if you're a younger person, you've got to go to YouTube and look it up. There's a lot of miscommunication and confusion where one person knows exactly what they're trying to say, and the other party doesn't have the foggiest idea about what they mean. And so they ask questions. And then he says, but that's what I said. And you have this very hilarious but really telling picture of what leadership too often looks like, which is one person who thinks they know what they're doing and the other person who can't get on board because nobody told them what the expectations should be. And that's often what it looks like in the world that we live in, whether you're in a nonprofit role, you're in association leadership, you're the leader in your company. You have to think about how you're going to get that point across with the people that you're working with. How do you get their message to match your message so that you can collaborate and do something bigger? Well, the first question I would ask you is, why are you doing these leadership roles at all? Particularly if you're doing volunteer work, you need to know exactly why you're investing this kind of time and energy in something that's probably unpaid and that probably puts you in front of people who won't listen to you because you're a volunteer, because you're unpaid, or because they know something more. And even if you're in a paid role, the leadership that you have in your company life, in the bigger role that you occupy, why are you doing it? Now, most of us can tell you what we do. I'm doing X, I'm doing Y, I'm doing Z. But what you're doing is not the same thing as why you do it. I'm fascinated by considering the why, and I love Simon Sinek's book, Start With Why, because he delves into this question of why you do what you do, which is an entirely different thing than what you do. In fact, if you think about how we evaluate information now, too many of us evaluate things strictly in metrics about A, B, and C. And we don't talk about that driving force underneath. Now, I'm not talking about some made-up passion for something that you woke up with and thought sounded like a good idea today. I'm talking about that underlying current in you that says there's meaning in the actions that you take and in the things that you say and do on a daily basis. Now, I'm going to recommend the book, Start With Why. Now, I know y'all won't read it, so fine. Go find his TED Talk. It's all over YouTube. It's one of the best TED Talks of all time. Start With Why, and invest that 15 minutes. And then I promise you, you're going to think about what you're doing differently. And the answer to why you do what you do won't come within the next minute after you watch the video or read the book. It's going to take you a few days of solid insight and evaluation to get to the bottom of why you're doing what you're doing. Now, for a lot of people, what they're doing is happening because there's a reason to do it. So if you're on the board of directors for Habitat for Humanity, are you on the board because it suits your business in town and it looks good on your resume and it's something that would impress people? If you're thinking about it in those terms, those are the reasons to do that volunteer job. Maybe you're in an executive management role in your company and you're looking at all the things you'd like to do next. And so you have the reasons for serving in that function in the company. But those reasons are often just a list of things to do. A list of roles that you know you have to fulfill to have the perfect LinkedIn profile, but there's no driving current underneath it that makes it matter to you. And so the difference between that reason for service, the reason for action, and the purpose for action is the fire underneath. When you have a purpose for doing something, it comes across different. People feel that you mean what you say. They feel that underneath all of this, there is a human being with a heart and a soul, and that's what people buy into. So if you're just fulfilling the steps on a ladder, how can you bring somebody with you? They either have to walk behind you or they're walking ahead of you, but they're certainly not walking side by side with you. Now, maybe they're holding the ladder in a support role, but they're not with you in that engagement. But when you are on fire with your purpose, man, fire is contagious. Think about how far a wildfire spark can go. It can go for miles and start a fire somewhere else. You can start a fire with all these things. And when you start a fire with other people, they are with you whether they meant to be with you or not. And sometimes those are the people that their purpose is ignited by yours. They didn't know what they wanted to do with life. Now, maybe you're in your medium years in life and you're trying to figure out what you're supposed to do next. And maybe you're a younger leader who says, I don't know what I want to do with my life. Or you're an older leader that says, I've got to find a way to leave a legacy for my years on earth. That's why you have to be on fire with this purpose, because for a legacy to occur, for meaning to happen, and for something powerful to happen with your life, you have to be on fire. And that's what's going to change everything about the way you lead. I don't like Lou Holtz, full disclosure, because as a Florida State football person, I can't like him because he coached at Notre Dame, all right? However, that being said, he's got one of the most amazing quotes I think I've ever encountered. Lou Holtz said, "It's not my job to motivate players." Now think about that for a second, y'all. You think about an effective football coach and you imagine that the best part of their job is in the locker room when they're getting the team fired up before they go on the field. And it looks like the coach is getting them motivated, but the coach is not getting them motivated. The coach is just spreading fire. And Lou says that his job is to acknowledge that they bring extraordinary motivation to the program. They bring extraordinary motivation to the program. What kind of recognition is that of the people around him? Have you ever stopped to acknowledge the people around you as extraordinary? I bet you haven't. Too many of us don't have anybody that thinks we're extraordinary. Now, some of y'all think way too much of yourselves, but just because you think you're extraordinary doesn't mean somebody else does. But when you see it in other people, that's what ignites it. And you see what Lou says at the end of this passage. He says it's his job not to demotivate them. And you know what demotivates people is when they are not acknowledged. And you don't see their extraordinary passion and you don't see their extraordinary gifts, and then you can't bring it out of them further if you're not looking for it. So think about what your role is in a slightly different way. There's a phrase that's often used out there called flip the script, to turn something around on its head and look at it differently, and that's exactly what Lou's talking about here. Your job is not to go in and teach somebody how to be motivated. Your job as a leader is to find their extraordinary talents and then not get in their way. I'm going to ask you this question. Who do you know that has energy? And what does that look like? For too many of us, we don't think about energy in terms of what other people have. If I say energy, you think Red Bull. That's not energy. That is a crappy chemical-filled drink. Now, if I say energy and you think electricity and the power in your building, it's probably because you just came through a storm and you didn't have any for a minute, or you just paid the bill. But when I say energy in regard to people around you and who has energy, I guarantee every one of y'all just thought of a name. You know that person. They walk into the room and other people say, huh, they're here. They feel them before they hear their voice. They see what they bring into the room just in terms of what's going on with them. You see the sparkle in somebody's eye. You'll see their smile. You'll see how they hug somebody. They bring something different to a room. Think about your board of directors meeting. Somebody on the board, when they walk in the room, the rest of the group says, oh, thank heavens they're here, because that's the person that's going to carry the group. They're probably going to have the fresh ideas and the inspiration, and they're the ones that say, there's going to be something better coming out of this. Because when we think of energy, it's not a negative thing. There's almost no negative connotations to energy. It's a positive word. It engages people and tells people that there's something electric going on. So when you think about those energetic people, I want you to consider something about how you treat the room when they're in it. There's a great analogy that comes from the coastal regions. Now, if you've never eaten crab, this won't make any sense to you at all, which means you're going to have to go to the local seafood market and buy some live crabs and test out the story I'm about to tell you. If you would like to cook crabs, you get you a big pot of water. You'll put it on the stove and get it boiling. Now, if you're very ambitious, you'll be outdoors with your propane cauldron. If you're very ambitious, you'll be outdoors with your propane cauldron. But most of us will be indoors cooking the crabs. Now, you put the water on and get it to boiling. What's amazing is that when you want to cook crabs, you have to buy live ones. Now, if you're some vegan, vegetarian, you're already horrified, but stick with me here because it's a pretty good story. You buy live crabs so they'll be fresh. If you put one crab in the pot, it's amazing. He will find a way out of that boiling water. No matter what he has to do, he'll get up to the edge of the pot and get out. Their instinct for survival when they're by themselves is amazingly strong. So that is how that person is, that energetic person you just thought about. You bring them into the room, they're going to immediately have the instinct of survival, of reaching for more, of getting to the top and being really great. However, when you put a bunch of crabs in the pot, it's a whole different story. That one crab tries to get to the brim, tries to get out, and the other crabs will pull him in. It's stunning to watch, y'all. You can take the most energetic, best crab that you've ever seen, and he tries to get out, and his peers get him killed instead, and then they all die. It's not that they are going to work with each other so that they can all survive. It's that what they're going to do is keep anybody from surviving. So the question I have for you is this: that energetic person who comes into the room and you know they're there and you feel it when they're there and you're ready to have them engage, what happens when they speak? Does the group support them, lift them up, and find life in their ideas and find their own ideas growing from that initial energy? Or does the room start to pull them down? Too often in our leadership roles, whether it's in a for-profit company or in association leadership, there are some old guard people in the room. Oh, no, we tried that 20 years ago. It didn't work then. It won't work now. Or the classic, well, that's not the way we've always done it. Any of those negative phrases that say we refuse to try and hear something different are what takes that energy crab and yanks them down into the pot and kills them. Now, if you've never tried to cook crabs, I know you're going to go home and try it now, but I want you to think about the room now when you enter it differently. Are you the one pulling somebody down into the boiling water to where their energy's gone forever? Or are you going to be the one that allows them to climb out? A fascinating leadership exercise is crab walking. And I know this also sounds weird, so welcome to the strange way to think about your leadership. But y'all crab walked when you were little. You did this in PE class at the elementary school, or you just raced with your siblings across the shag carpet. And it was fun back then, but now that you're watching this and you're probably not a child anymore, you're thinking, Leigh Brown, I am not walking like a crab, not now, not ever, no how. So I had a room full of leadership people for a training event. And they had gotten into a very grumpy space because their ideas seemed to go back into this same tailspin of, that won't work here. Yes, you're from North Carolina. We're not from North Carolina. It won't work here. We're not going to do that, not going to try it. All this grumpy was going on. And so we took a break. So let's go out to the beach and have a crab walking race. Well, the first response was, not going to do it. Well, all it took was one. And the one person says, I don't mind trying it. And all of a sudden, the group tries it. And what happened is hilarious. because the crab walking turned into a little race, and some of them scooched on their backsides, and one of them even turned over and crawled on his front side just to win. But the universal thing that happened was laughter. And when adults start laughing with each other, the defensive walls come down real quick. And actually, you can't simultaneously laugh with your peers and tear them apart. And so when we went back into the leadership session to go back to our brainstorming and back to the idea creation that was going to change how things look, they had different conversations. So you can take that crab environment and be the pot of boiling water and destroy things, or you can take the crab environment and go walking on the beach with each other, fall down, look a little silly, laugh, and start working together in a way that's entirely different than you expected. Now that you're going to think about how you can be in that space of high energy, laughter, listening, and supportive around you, the way you're going to take that forward is by being what I call the non-agenda leader. Now, when I say agenda, it used to be a word with a positive connotation. Agenda, well, it's just a list of action items we need to accomplish at our meeting. However, in today's world, agenda can be negative. If I say, she came into the room with an agenda, your walls go up. Well, I don't care what her agenda is. I've got an agenda too, because it means somebody had a preset notion about the outcomes. And that can be positive because you need somebody that's willing to move the ball forward, but it can also be negative. Because if somebody comes in with an agenda, it could send off the signals that they're not open to new ideas and to your input. And if you want any group to have an effective outcome with you at the helm, you need to make space for all of their extraordinary talents. So I believe there are 5 characteristics to the non-agenda leader. The first one is the non-agenda leader is not afraid to cut the cancer. Now, what do I mean by this? Well, maybe you're a cancer survivor. You found something that wasn't right, a tumor, a lump, whatever. You went to the doctor. The doctors in general don't say, just let it be. We'll just see what happens. It's been there for a while. Just let it be. We'll work around it. No, you know that when a cancer is in an organism, if you do not get rid of it, it spreads and it grows and eventually consumes to the point of death and overcoming. This happens in your organization too. Now, just as I asked y'all to think of someone who is a high energy addition to a room, there's somebody in the room that's acting as a cancer. They walk in and it's an entirely different environment. The room goes, oh God, they're here. Please let them leave. Please don't let them talk. It's that person that I say is often circling the drain in your organization. They won't die, they won't go away, but they're there all the time. And maybe they leave one committee and they go to the next one and they keep circulating and they will not stop. And what happens when they're in the room is that they're the ones that will tear down the people around them. Sometimes it's unconsciously doing it. It's just how they're wired. I've also found that some of our very cancerous people are exhausted by their volunteer roles. They're exhausted by the job they've been in for years, and their way of demonstrating their exhaustion is by sniping at others, which we know is completely non-helpful. So you think about this cancerous person, you've got to think about removing them from the situation. And most of us just haven't had the nerve to do it. Especially if you're in a volunteer role, you're in a nonprofit or an association, and the response is often, but they're a member too. Yes, they're a member too, but if they're destroying the organization from within, you've got to move them along. So as a leader, are you willing to remove the negative people from the room? And by the way, this is not a text or an email conversation. This is you, eyeball to eyeball, to say, we appreciate all that you've done for this organization for all these years. It is time for you to move along to other interests. We will recognize you forever, but not in this particular setting. Be bold enough to realize that that person could be negatively impacting everybody around them. More importantly, they're keeping something from happening that needs to happen for your organization to grow, and that's that you've got to find a way to raise up the right ones. When you do not create new space in your organization, there's nowhere for somebody new to come in. And that's no different than parenting. You had kids, you've got grandkids, or maybe you're an aunt or an uncle. There's some young person that you've seen in your life, and you look at them as a future opportunity for the community, for the family, for the organization you're volunteering in, or where you work. That person is the future. And so you invest energy in them and create a space for them to grow and change and become more extraordinary. But when you've got that nasty, cancerous person in there, then they're going to block that wonderful opportunity for that new voice in your organization. So you think about this in terms of eliminating a very nasty person, possibly retraining them, but most of them can't be retrained. You're going to eliminate the really nasty person because otherwise there's no space for that new one who was raised correctly, who wants to participate, who wants to be the shining star. There's only a finite number of hours in the day. There's a finite amount of energy that you have for what you're doing. And when you're driven by purpose and somebody's over here trying to extinguish your flame, you got to remember that they're not just extinguishing you, they could be extinguishing the future as well. Now, the second characteristic of that non-agenda leader is that they create a challenge culture. Now, this is very hard in today's world of experts, when we have raised an entire generation of people who got trophies for everything, who think they are the best at everything. And when you inherently think that you're the best, what happens is you don't hear other people's input because they're just wrong. That's not me, so it's wrong. A non-agenda leader says, I'm cool with being challenged. The person who comes to you and says, I don't agree with your viewpoint, and here is another way to consider it. This kind of a leader says, I'm open to your ideas. I'm open to being challenged. I'm open to being wrong. When you put forth the concept of being willing to be wrong, other people feel obligated to help you with their ideas and with their growth. And especially when you're willing to create a challenge culture that goes through every single person in the room. They challenge each other. And suddenly your board of directors goes from an environment of rubber stamp or yes men to people who raise their hands and have active discourse. Now, I don't mean hollering at each other and big arguing and divisiveness and fisticuffs. I mean discourse, like we used to do with debate, point, counterpoint, so that people consider all sides of an issue and a discussion, because that's what helps us grow, and that's what changes your organization forever, is the ability to have intelligent, thoughtful discourse. Now, there's 3 ingredients to creating this challenge culture. The first one is you have to have a giant dose of humility. Now, that's the last word we think of when we talk about leaders. Most of the time, leaders are busy being number one, top of the totem pole, got the best business card ever. But the leaders that you remember interacting with that really had an impact on you, they were humble enough to realize that you mattered. If you don't have a giant dose of humility, you aren't letting other people matter. And when they don't matter, there's not going to be a challenge culture. And part of this leads to that second characteristic of the challenge culture, which is that this leader has an ability to listen. And I don't mean to be quiet long enough for the other person to talk. That's not listening. We all know that active listening, as defined by scientists for years, involves hearing and then repeating back what the other person said. Oh, you mentioned X? Well, now that you've said that, I can say Y. When you hear what they say, repeat it back. That's active listening. And that tells people that they were heard. And when people feel that they've been heard, they feel that they matter. And when they feel that they matter, they're going to create more ideas. Their purpose grows, and it infects the whole room. And that means that you get more of that third ingredient, which is respect. Now, respect doesn't mean you have to give in to somebody. You're not letting them have their own way. It doesn't mean that you have to never get your own way. It doesn't mean that you have to be all things to all people. What it means is that when you disagree, you say, that was another human being talking to me. I'm going to hear them, and I'm going to understand that their experience matters to them, and therefore I should listen to it at a minimum. Now, it sounds easy, and it sounds like something that's a no-brainer, but it seems to be lacking in our current culture. So what if you're the one that brings it back? Now, the third characteristic of this non-agenda leader is that they never, ever say, "Well, it's not my job." That phrase drives me crazy. The best leaders ever are the ones that absolutely do every job that comes along the path, no matter what it is. And I love following that meme series on the internet of "you had one job." That's where this came from, this image. So consider something about this image. Now, I'm from the South. We're very comfortable with roadkill in the South. It's just part of our general landscape scenery. So you have here a dead possum, and the man who was lying in the street obviously saw it. There's no way he couldn't have, because he didn't hit it with one line, but he hit it with both of the double lines. Now, he rolled right over that dead possum with his road markings. Now, let's consider what happens later on, because he did not scoop up that possum and throw it to the edge. The possum's going to disintegrate, be gone at some point. And then what's going to be created, y'all? You no longer have solid double yellow lines. You're going to have dotted double yellow lines. And in traffic rules, we know that when the lines are dotted, you can pass. Now, you look at this street right here. You've got a 4-lane road with traffic at whatever time they took this picture. When those lines are double dotted and some driver sees it, what happens if they now think they can pass and they hit another car head on and somebody dies? All because one guy was too lazy to move a dead possum. Your best leaders don't do that. They see something that needs doing and they just do it. They don't have to hunt around for some minion. They roll up their sleeves and get it done. Now, I know this is a terrible picture here because it was sunset and it was dark, but I have to tell you, this is a friend of mine, and at the time, Mrs. Poole was running for a very giant leadership position. In fact, she was running to be the first vice president for the world's largest grassroots organization, the National Association of Realtors. She and I were arriving at the same time to go to an event. Now, at the time, she is one of the most esteemed leaders in the organization. I'm just a regular old speaker, but we were going to share a car. And so we get the last rental car this tiny airport had, and of course we get in the car and there's not a drop of gas in the thing. It's on fumes. And so we stopped at the first gas station we could find. Now, I stopped the car, but before I could get it off, Mrs. Poole is out of the car getting gas. I said, "Get back in the car. I will pump the gas." Because when you are the person that's lower on the totem pole, you know that your job is to serve those that are higher up. But her response was, "No, I can pump my own gas. This is fine." I said, "Well, then fine. I'm taking your picture, because this is exactly why you make a great leader." It didn't even cross her mind to sit there like a princess and wait for somebody to serve her. This is the kind of leader she is. That she wanted people around her to not feel beholden because she could do it herself. So ask yourself, the last time you went into a role of service with somebody that was below you, even if they don't see themselves as below you, you're in a hierarchical structure. Who are you serving? And by the way, part of knowing who you're serving is in those conversations that happen, and that's why that little picture of the telephone's there. I want you to remember that when the phone rings, no matter who it is, they're above you or below you on this imaginary ladder, are you talking to them? Are you doing your best to find out how you can make their job easier, how you can assist and help? Because that's part of that non-agenda leader. They're not so focused on driving their point home as they are on making sure that everybody around them is a part of that bigger solution. Now, this is just eye candy. You can skip that slide. Now, the fourth characteristic of the non-agenda leader is they're not afraid of accountability. This is the person that says, "I'd like for us to do these 3 things in the next 30 days. Who's going to follow up with me and make sure I did my part?" That's huge. It's so important for you that you look at this opportunity to say, "I need the help of other people. I know what I have to get done, but I'm more likely to get it done if somebody's going to hold me accountable." Life works better that way. You do it for your kids. You ask them to do something, and then if they don't do it, you go back to them and say, "I told you to do this." You need that in your volunteer life too. You need that in your work life. It doesn't matter where you're leading, you're going to do more if somebody will hold you accountable. Because what happens on the day that you didn't get something done? And they call and say, hey, did you finish this task? If you're honest enough to say no, a really great accountability partner says, could I help you? And then if you have that ingredient of humility, you're going to tell them, yes, you can help me, and allow them to shine in a way that's going to make both of you stronger, and your organization will never look the same. I got to remind y'all too, as we look at all these characteristics and you look at how you have to be and think differently, you have to fight the status quo. Ronald Reagan, one of the best presidents on the history of anything ever, forever, I love Ronald Reagan. He said, status quo is Latin for the mess we're in. And too many of our leaders think it's okay to stay in the current mess because that's just what we have, and maybe one day it'll magically sort itself out. Well, I think about status quo like I'm looking at pigs. Now, pigs are wonderful because bacon. We all love bacon. But think about this. When a pig wants to eat, how do they eat? They wait for you to bring them something. And what do you bring them to eat? You are not bringing them a filet mignon and a nice baked potato. You're bringing them what we affectionately call slop. A slop is a bucket that you have in the kitchen with stuff in it. Some of you people call it compost, but you take all of those little garden and food scraps, put a little bit of water in it to make it more palatable, and you carry it out to slop the pigs, and they eat it. And they just wait for you. They'll fight amongst themselves at first when it shows up, but if you don't bring them their slop, you know what they're going to eat? They'll just sit there mad and wait for something. They might try and root out, but they're not aggressively going to seek out a different life. That's what too many of our organizations look like. You're sitting there as a volunteer leader and you're waiting to be led. You're waiting for staff to tell you what to do. You're waiting for some of your peers to tell you what to do. But that's not how you change the world that you're in. That's not how you impact your community. And it's definitely not effective leadership. If you want to be an effective leader, you have to stop being a pig and start being a lion. Now think about lions for a minute. How do they accomplish such things? Lions aren't huge, but they can take down a giant and very vicious rhinoceros. They can take down a huge elephant that's many times bigger than they are. The reason they do it is because they don't hunt by themselves. They work as a pride. They go together, they kill together, they eat together, they protect one another. That's what effective leadership is. You're looking at the strengths of those around you in a way that's going to allow all of you to go and take down big game. To not let external forces that are bigger than you win just because they're bigger. But if you are more nimble and you're smarter and you're willing to work as a team, there's nothing you can't take down.